You are listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy, episode 15. This week, we're going to talk all about people-pleasing. Let's dive in. Hey there, you are listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy. This is a podcast for overthinkers, overachievers, perfectionists, type A, stressed out, anxious people who just want to calm down and feel better. I'm your host, certified life coach Jackie DeCrenis. Hey there, and welcome back. So this week, I want to talk about a syndrome. I want to call it people-pleasing paralysis. Now, I think everybody knows what a people-pleaser is, and maybe even for you, this might resonate with you as a people-pleaser. Because this is something that I see almost consistently with virtually every female client I have. Now, it's a gross generalization to say that only women are people pleasers or that all women are people pleasers. It's not true. But I see it especially in women. And I think historically it's because women were put in a caretaking, subservient role for most of history. And as women take their proper place now in boardrooms and governments and entrepreneurial roles as international icons, entertainers, we are getting better, but there is still an overwhelming need for people pleasing. So time and time again, like I said, one of the things that I hear underneath even some of my most powerful clients, my clients who are, running studios or networks or executive producers of television series or lawyers or doctors, there is this inherent fear of not being liked. This people-pleasing syndrome. And look, is it great to get along with others? Of course it is. Is it great to think about other people's feelings and be compassionate? Absolutely. But the problem, or I should say it becomes a problem when it's at the expense of our own happiness. And that's oftentimes what this pattern, this people-pleasing pattern, I don't know how many times I can say that, right? I love the alliteration though, people-pleasing pattern, people-pleasing paralysis. Anyway, but this people-pleasing pattern shows up and it undermines our authority, our integrity, and our joy. So I had one client who used to or does run a dance studio, and she was constantly having to bend over backwards to accommodate her demanding dance moms. Her longtime clients would often pay late, negotiate their own price, and always be threatening to take their precious little daughters to another studio, even though they had spent more than a decade training with my client, and she was truly the best in her area. And yet she was so afraid of rocking the boat with any of her clients who eventually, became her friends just because they'd worked together so long. But she couldn't even stand up for herself, and she would let them take advantage of her business, and it affected her self-esteem. She was always walking on eggshells with them for fear that they would leave or that there would be groupthink. If one mom or family left, then there would be a mass exodus for other girls and families to leave. And so she had to tiptoe around what their needs were instead of what was best for her business. And she noticed that would show up in her family life and in every other aspect of her life because, as we always say, as we do one thing, we tend to do it in all facets of our life. And another client told me that she would often lose her voice. She would develop sore throats under time of stress, or she literally found her voice getting higher and higher when she was needing something or asking for something. She came to discover that she was repressing her emotions and wasn't speaking up for herself. So her voice or throat would actually fail her. I had another client who, in spite of a very high-level position, always felt like she was the one who was forced to compromise her creative vision and didn't get to run the show in the end. But by no means, like I said, is people-pleasing unique to women. I've had a handful of male clients and colleagues who are also people-pleasers. Interestingly enough, they're often in caretaker roles, either in the house or with children. This thrusts them into the same patterns as their female counterparts, having to worry about children or their spouse who works long hours, what to make for dinner, is the laundry done, did the carpools get done, do the kids have their soccer cleats, did they remember their water bottles? All of those things put us in these patterns of people pleasing, because as we're caretakers, we go into overdrive and then start extrapolating that behavior, which is good and kind and necessary when you're a parent, but it shows up in the workplace, and it often shows up with friends, to the point where we start letting people walk all over us or take advantage of us, or things like, oh, you don't work, so can you pick up my kid, or can you babysit, or can you do this, or can you bring the muffins, or can you do more for the bake sale? And they become the de facto volunteer parent for everything, simply because they're the stay-at-home caregiver. So what are classic signs of a people pleaser? Well, the first one is always hard time saying no. If you have a hard time saying no, that is a good indicator you might be a people pleaser. I know, because I have a hard time saying no. Another one is always putting other people first, being preoccupied with what other people think. And if you're a regular listener of this podcast, then you're probably an overthinker. And if you're an overthinker, you're probably preoccupied with what other people might think as well. Another one is overextending yourself to others, like really going out of the way, not just doing a favor for somebody who maybe is sick or has been in the hospital or they got tied up at work. It's always doing and going the extra mile for others. Pretending to agree with people, even when you feel differently. This is a big one. Apologizing often, even when you have nothing to apologize for. Just the habit of saying, oh, sorry I'm late, sorry I didn't get back to you, sorry. That habit is a people-pleasing habit. Another one is feeling responsible for how other people feel. Neglecting your own needs. This usually comes in the form of lacking self-care, not exercising, eating properly, getting enough rest. Needing praise to feel good. Going to great lengths to avoid conflict. Not admitting when you're hurt for fear that other people will be upset. Struggling with low self-esteem. Now look, there's a difference between being subservient and agreeable. Being able to get along with others in the workplace, on a team, or in a community is really important, but not at the expense of losing yourself in the group dynamic, or even in an interpersonal friendship or relationship. People-pleasing is not a mental disorder, but when it spirals out of control, it can often be associated with depression, anxiety, and codependence. And people-pleasing is a learned behavior, which means it can be unlearned too. So how do we stop this behavior or syndrome? Well, the first thing is learning to say no. I know, it's so hard. I hate it. But the trick is practicing on small things. Pay attention to when somebody asks you for a favor. If it's easy and you want to do it, by all means do it. But learn to take a pause before jumping into every request. If you know something's an absolute no, just say no. I know it's hard and you think that they might judge you or not like you, or it might hurt your friendship or your status in the community. But you can also just say, I don't think I'll be able to, but let me get back to you. So take a pause, but come back and be in touch with what you really need. And it's okay to say no. Another one is to start setting your boundaries. You don't have to be available 24/7, and you don't have to do something just because you're available. Here's another one. Listen to your inner voice. Last week, I did a whole episode on your inner critic. Now, there's a big difference between your inner critic and your inner voice. Your inner voice is a guiding light. It's your intuition, that gut feeling, the one we ignore all too often. And not the one that comes with judgment. That's the critic. It's the one that tells you the truth. Let your inner voice guide you about people and when you're overdoing too much, and also when you're in toxic relationships. Another one is to avoid making excuses. You don't always have to have a reason for not wanting to do something or not being able to do something. Remember, no is a complete sentence. Practice self-care. Go back and listen to the first 4 episodes of this podcast, my 4 essentials on daily self-care. When you have good daily habits and practice self-care, you have a stronger constitution. When you feel better about yourself, you will attract like-minded people who will naturally connect to you. That's your tribe. So by taking better care of yourself, you will inadvertently be attracting a better tribe to yourself. More like-minded people, more considerate people, people who have a natural exchange of wanting to help others and do for others in the same way you do, but not out of guilt or obligation or fear. Start asking for help. I had a therapist tell me years ago that by always being willing to do everything myself and never asking for help, people tended to not do things for me when I asked, simply because they weren't used to hearing me ask for help. I had to learn how to ask for things, sometimes big, sometimes small. But by willing to have people be uncomfortable or annoyed or even say no to me was a big lesson. And I couldn't let that stop me from asking for help when I needed it. So, here's another. Make yourself happy. What do you like to do? If you've been people-pleasing your whole life, you may have lost yourself in others and really never cultivated this skill. You may be so accustomed to always serving others that you have no idea what makes you happy. And this is very true for long-term marriages, particularly if there was a habit of codependence, or if you were a stay-at-home mom and then suddenly became an empty nester, but had really no life outside your children. This can happen if you were a workaholic and worked for a very demanding company or a demanding boss, where you just worked all the time and didn't even cultivate your own personal desires or skills. So finding a hobby, taking up a sport, taking a class, joining a new group with people with common interests, these can all help cultivate your sense of self and joy. People-pleasing can be very closely related to perfectionism. And it's not about being liked or being judged. It's about wanting to be perceived a certain way to compensate for our own self-doubt. There's nothing wrong with wanting to help others and be kind. But getting in touch with what you genuinely want to do and who you want to do it for is very different than just saying yes to everything and becoming a doormat to others. Look, I'm not suggesting that changing this character trait is an easy one, but changing this habit can incrementally free you up from your overthinking brain. It can make more time for things that you truly love. This is going to be another lifetime practice, and it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but you are going to be so much happier, and your self-esteem is going to grow exponentially as a result of this. So let's start small. Try practicing 3 simple things today. Practice saying no to something that you don't want to do or you don't have time to do it. Pause before you commit to saying yes to something today, and make sure that you do have the time or desire to do it. And then ask for help where you need it. And be okay if someone says no or rolls their eyes, but get in the habit of asking your kids to set the dining room table, or asking your husband to take out the trash, or asking somebody who's on their way home to stop for that quart of milk instead of going out again for the 3rd errand of the day. Just get accustomed to asking. And it's so difficult because we don't want to impose on anybody. We don't want to be burdened. But part of getting help for the big things when you really need it is the practice of asking for the small things and being okay with whatever the answer is. And being okay with somebody being inconvenienced a little bit. So try doing this every day for a week and see what happens. Let's say goodbye to the people pleaser in you and say hello to the newly empowered you. Why? Because you deserve it. So we're only asking you to start small and do these 3 things every day and just see how it feels. Just take notice of all the times that your inclination is to just go with the flow, be agreeable, swallow your opinion, and say yes when you really want to say no. And just pay attention to it and see how it feels in your body when you start being more authentic and true to yourself. All right, guys, thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week, and bye for now. If you want to learn more tips about managing your stress and how to manage your overthinking brain, just go to my website and sign up for my weekly newsletter at JackieDecrenis.com. That's JackieDecrenis.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Jackie Decrenis. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of Overthinker's Guide to Joy. If you like what was offered in today's episode, I would love you to leave a review and subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts.